planning board meeting too soon. Short me out.
Christmas time, Christmas sauce.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting of the December 5th, 2019 Scott County Board of Commissioners to order. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The agenda has been distributed. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, it'll stand approved as distributed. Next item on our agenda is the minutes of the November 19, 2019 County Board meeting. Does anyone have any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Madam Chair, I'll move the minutes as they were presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the November 19, 2019 Scott County Board meeting minutes. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Next, we're at the place on our agenda where we recognize interested citizens. If you're here to talk to the board about a matter that's not on the agenda, feel free to approach the podium. Limit of 5 minutes per person or subject. All right, doesn't look like we have anybody today, so thank you. Moving on to item 5, which is our Scott County Delivers topic today. We have an impressive lineup here. Chris Harder will get us started.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Commissioners. We do have an impressive lineup this afternoon. We're here to talk about risk management and mitigation, and we really, you're going to hear a lot today about considering risk in everything that we do and how to manage workflow and access and mobility against risk and safety, and I think these folks are really well positioned to speak to that today. Because risk management is kind of a vast topic, the conversation today is going to focus largely around safety, and we're just excited to have the conversation. It's going to be part of the next strategic plan if the board so approves in a couple weeks. And so we're looking forward to having the conversation. So with that, I'm going to ask the people on the panel to introduce themselves, and we'd ask the presenters to introduce yourselves. I think Jennifer is going to do a quick overview, and then we'll get started.
Thank you.
I am Cindy Geis, and I'm the Community Services Director.
Suzanne Arntzen, Children's Services Manager.
Brad Davis, Planning and Resource Management Director.
John Kwasniewski, Sheriff's Office.
Steve Jones, Office of Management and Budget.
Nathan Rash, our Data Privacy Coordinator.
I'm Kevin Nelson. I work in ER as a safety specialist.
Joe Wida, Highway Maintenance and Facilities Manager.
Danny Lenz, Chief Financial Officer.
Jennifer Schultz, Enterprise Risk Manager.
Jeff Peichel, CIO.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off. As Chris had said, this is actually our third time before the board talking about risk management. We've been here every year for the last 3 years, so we're excited to be back. In those first 2 years, the presentations around risk management really centered around the framework and theory about what risk management looks like. And in some of the feedback that we received last year, which was really important feedback, we were asked to take a look about how we were doing risk management on a day-to-day basis. And as Chris said when she kicked us off, there's a level of risk in everything we do in the county. There's just getting out of bed, there's a level of risk. So we just really want to kind of highlight for the board and for staff how risk management is happening in the day-to-day operations. This presentation is really focused on security, and we looked at 4 buckets. IT security, of course. We also looked at financial security. We took a look at legal security from a data practices perspective. And then finally, we also know that there's a lot of work being done around security of our people and our facilities. So those are the 4 large buckets that we really focused this presentation on. So with that.
Great, thank you. All right.
Should I kick us off?
Please do.
All right.
Thank you.
So as you guys did sort of the preparation for today, are there key learnings that stand out for any or all of you in terms of as you looked at your data and looked at processes, again, key learnings or highlights?
Well, I think that's a really good question, Suzanne. You know, I think as we were preparing for this, it kind of went lots of different directions, to be honest with you. And then when we really centered in on that security piece and realizing that, gosh, a lot of us are doing security stuff all day long. It's just in a little bit different kind of a way, but everybody's kind of managing that risk. So not that that really answers your question, but that's kind of how we landed on that. I don't know if other folks have some kind of some pieces around that. Certainly, I think there were some interesting pieces around some of the IT security that that we have in the presentation, especially in light of our recent malware attack and how that was impacted and such. So I think there were some interesting pieces about that and what we can do and how we can mitigate that moving forward.
I would also add that I think we're still in the process of identifying what are the best measures related to risk security in this. We have some good measures in there, but they're pretty new. Some only like a year old that we're still developing what is the trend. You know, in the past, we were trying to measure something that didn't happen. I think we're getting better information on saying, okay, what do we have in place and what are our interventions to try and change that? An easy example is slip, trips, and falls. You know, how do we impact that and see that reduced? But we don't have data going back, 10 years, and it's sources that we all gain internally and have to track internally. So really kind of still developing in that area.
So I have a question. So you kind of talked briefly about one of the things that I was thinking about today, actually this week when I came back to work, and it had to do with, we just had a heavy snowfall. It snowed for days, and from that, of course, there was some ice. Things kind of melted and refroze. And knowing that our staff now are walking a little bit further than they're used to, their entrances were a little bit closer, they're having to cross streets or walk down streets or walk down sidewalks they probably haven't had to do before. What type of measures are we putting in place now early on in the day to help try to mitigate maybe falls that we wouldn't have had last year because they had a little bit easier access to an entrance than what we do today? I came in and I stated that, gosh, I came through all the snow, the sidewalks hadn't been plowed. I didn't want to walk down a street that didn't have a sidewalk because I couldn't see the black ice. It's a dark street. So I parked on the other side and I'm like, okay, now what's my best route without falling? And I had a whole bunch of stuff, so it's like your hands aren't free. And I did have a staff fall this week in one of my departments. And so what are we going to do knowing that we're in a really weather-centric time of year where we have ice and snow?
I think that, from a safety perspective, people who report situations in which are dangerous is always helpful. And I up in the employee relations office, get emails from people saying this area is bad. I also do a complete walk around our facility campus here. And I'll talk to and meet with people in the facilities department and tell them areas that I think are going to be problems. And so from that standpoint, from a safety standpoint, our employees do the best work of telling us where they see problems occurring. There are some facility sidewalk maintenance and those types of things that are really difficult during times like this where we have a rain, a snow, and that ice is under there, and putting salt down sometimes washes away. As the snow melts, it washes away, and so we've got that going right down the drains, and then at 4:30 everything freezes and it's like a ice skating rink out there. This was just a really difficult snowfall, but Joe probably has some other ideas about how they plan on handling some of that. But from a safety perspective, that's what we're always doing. Keep eyes on it, talk to maintenance, see where they can help us all the time. That's going on continuously.
Yeah, just to follow up on Kevin said, people speaking up is one thing. We obviously can't be everywhere, one size everywhere, but we've done a few things. We've added lighting along 5th. We're pre-treating. We've added salt in spots for folks to use on their own if they see a slippery spot, but the best thing is if you're not seeing something, to report it to us.
The other thing I would say is we are trying to do some preemptive communication from Kevin that he's sending out on advice for handling when there's a snowfall or ice events, things not to do, like maybe driving up to the building and dropping off your arm loads full of stuff so that your hands are free for balancing when you're making those trips or making multiple trips, although multiple passes along the ice maybe isn't really what you want to do. But some of those things of how can you protect yourself as well, because as they said, it's a tough time of year for snowfalls where you get the thawing and the freezing, and so that can wash away. So what can we do to mitigate the risk to ourselves? And so that's the employee side of this, which to Jennifer's point of the framework for risk, it's involved in everything we do. How do we educate the employees on how to mitigate those risks, or at least evaluate and what is a reasonable risk in approaching their jobs as simple as walking into the building?
While we're on this topic, I think it's page 22 that has some of this data on reported employee injuries. When I was looking at this graph, I was trying to find some trends that spoke to me, and I'll ask the panel if there was some trends that you're seeing here. But another question I had is, are these all incidents that happen on campus? For example, the violent encounters seems to have increased, but I didn't know if those encounters happened here on campus or a worker had a violent encounter outside of this campus.
So the numbers that are put together here, I put together from our work comp reporting. So we always preface any numbers that we have with, there are a lot of people who have little things happen that don't report them. So these are the people that report things, and ultimately they don't all become work comp payable issues, but some of them do. I think when Susan asked if there was anything that we learned from all of this, I think actually going back and looking at some of our numbers, I was always under the belief that slips, trips, and falls was our biggest problem. And when I think about how many people we have walking back and forth, and how many employees we have, how many customers we have, actually we have very few people actually reporting slips, trips, and falls that end up being injuries or whatever. And all of a sudden I'm looking at these trends of violent encounters. 99% of those violent encounters are happening with police officers or corrections officers in our county. But those numbers are up and they're trending upwards. And so, you know, that is one thing I learned is I'm going, oh, wait a minute. Well, we've all been paying attention to the sidewalks. We've got, you know, all these violent situations going on. Some of the aggressive behaviors have also been increasing. They don't get reported as work comp issues, but we see it all the time where customers are becoming more and more impatient and more abusive, either verbally or you know, their physical presence. And so I would say that's what I glean from all of this information. We're going to keep an eye on this stuff and see where some of we look for bigger trends, 5, 6, 7-year trends, and see how they all correlate.
Do you have definition, Kevin, around like the violent encounters? Certainly from a child welfare, child protection, our staff, I think, are seeing that a lot. I don't know that absent an injury necessarily, that that information necessarily would get reported to ER. So just from a tracking, are there clear sort of definitions so you can make sure you're getting the data that you want to help track that?
And the tracking for that was a lot of information that we couldn't put into this because that would be very detailed. But yeah, you're exactly right. For instance, the JAF, your after hours people who are dealing with younger people who have sort of meltdowns. Those are also in these numbers for injuries because some people got injured. But there's a lot of those that don't get reported, and they were sort of assaultive situations that didn't get reported. Yeah, I do break those out individually. We can say exactly how many were caused at the jail, how many were caused at all of the different locations. And we get a pretty good picture of what's going on as far as those clients and the violent tendencies.
So I appreciate your comment about wanting to look at the data over time, but I'm just wondering, given that, I mean, there's a sizable number of those violent encounters, are there steps now that either through training or de-escalation or safety training for officers, or is there something to mitigate what we're seeing just even over the last 3 years?
Well, you know, so many of these, and John can talk to these, but so many of these are incidences like that, right? Especially for deputies who are arresting somebody and suddenly they do something very quickly, it's very acute, there's a quick injury, but it's not a trend of somebody not doing something right. The jail is probably a better example of how we go back and look at the use of force, we go back and look at the way that we approach things. And after these incidences are reported, I have a system of going back to those departments and trying to figure out what are we doing, is that our policy? Do we need to look at that? And so those things are going on a continuous basis. Okay. Even sometimes when we get sometimes departments approach it as like, that's an inmate, that's going to happen. and then I say, well, let's not just put a cap on it like that. Let's really take a look at this and see if there's something we can, do in the long term. And that the same happens with the people in human services who have to deal with some of their clients. We're looking at where are we meeting them, how are these sort of things unfolding, right? Keep them a little bit safer.
Big step that the sheriff's office took was sending each deputy to CIT training this past year. So every deputy has attended a week-long critical incident training.
Oh, nice.
De-escalation. It's not all physical anymore, dealing with mental health. That's the big issue now in law enforcement that hasn't been, it's been a big problem in years past, but the law enforcement is changing now to help officers deal with that situations a lot better than we used to. Like when Kevin and I started 20 years ago, it was a lot different than it is now in law enforcement, and the philosophy is a lot different now too.
Nice. Thank you.
Also, we Johnny and I are going to be working on a program that helps some of our people, like our service desk, who can communicate with people or foresee some of this stuff happening before it actually takes place, and give them better tools to deal with it ahead of time and figure out ways of de-escalating it before it explodes. And that is something that's on sort of our focus here for the next year.
Great, thanks.
So one of the other areas that, I had been looking at was on our cyber attack information, and there's multiple slides that are on that. If I can get to it. I'm going to start with the slide 14. So for me, this seemed really concerning, and maybe I'm misreading the slide, so, or the graph. So on here, I see that 815 employees got sent a Scott County phishing email, but only in the 400s, so maybe 60%, 55% of them actually reported it as phishing. And I look at those numbers going, holy cow, that is a huge risk. And if people either are not responding, they're not doing anything, they're just deleting the email, so they're not acting one way or the other than saying, I don't know what this is, I'm going to delete it. And how are we getting that message through for the people that are taking the wrong two steps, just deleting it and not notifying you guys, saying, we really do need you to hit the fish alert so that we know you understand. And then second thing is those people, and I see the next slide is, this is where we want to be, where people who, we want to be at the 100% or low 2.5% of the people who actually get phishing emails. We want them to respond and make sure that they hit the fish button on their Outlook. But they don't, and I know that I have some staff that are repeat offenders. I mean, they'll go through it, they'll have to go through the know before training over and over and over again, and they just don't seem to get it. So my question is that the only step that we're doing? Is there, hey, you know what, you failed this test so many different times, you're gonna need a more in-depth thing? Because the risk, and we all felt it on first floor, is huge when someone clicks the wrong button and we're down for a while. And the impact to our citizens and our residents, or any of our visitors, can be extreme. So what have we thought about just the know before? Some of these graphs where we see that people aren't responding, what are we going to do about that, or what's our next step?
So there's a couple different questions there, Cindy. We actually met yesterday between ER, Nate, and myself to talk through some of those questions about what is that next step for people that are either not getting it or not getting the training done. We haven't come up with specific actions yet. We're going to continue to talk about options and bring that to governance to say, here's where we think we should go. Is this the appropriate place that you want us to go in terms of either turning off people's email access until they either complete the training or, things like that. So we don't have a concrete next step yet, but that is something that we are talking about, and actually we started talking about when we put these metrics together. To your comment about slide 14, This was a hard one too, because somebody that gets a phishing email and just deletes it, it's not like that's the wrong behavior, but you're exactly right in saying it's really, we would like them to report it, so we know, hey, you get it. You understand that you get a phish email and you should report it. So we're missing that data about, and obviously the difference between what you see in slide 14 and slide 13, which is the failure rate, if all 400 people that didn't report it clicked a link, this number would be a lot higher.
Right.
So we know that that's not the case. So a lot of people are just deleting it, and that's okay, but you're exactly right. We would like people to report it. The other thing that we have talked about but haven't really come up with a good solution yet is how do we get that message out? We have a few avenues today. We have like the plugged-in newsletter. We've put information in there. We've put information on the HR site with the streaming news content and stuff like that. I'm not confident that's hitting enough of the population. We've talked about it at senior leadership as well. We're not sure what other avenues we have available to get that kind of information out. And that was highlighted in our what's not working well, is the whole training and communication piece. We seem to have lack a central communication vehicle for staff on things like this that affect everybody, and how do we communicate that effectively? So it's not something we have an answer to yet.
And I think that, as we talked as a group, that was something that I recognized across the board in terms of training. How do we make sure people are actually taking the training, doing whatever the training is, whether it's IT or if it's safety training, trips, slips, and falls, whatever that may be. Are there consequences if they don't take training or they aren't doing it? And then also, what's that form of communication to make sure that the message is getting out to reach everybody? Because we know a lot of people get lots of emails. We just delete emails. What are the other forms of communications to keep getting these words out that send that message? So I think those are two areas across the board that need to be addressed.
I would add that I think our leadership needs to have that discussion too about what is the level of risk we're willing to accept on this. We've had information about people who just aren't even completing the phishing campaign, the training on an annual basis, but yet we're still seeing those same names pop up that they're not completing the training, despite engaging leadership on that. Where are we comfortable with saying we are going to take more direct action and say that things are going to have to change before someone has certain accesses or whatever that is? Going a step further, if we're already not reaching the compliance level we want on just completing the training, what are we willing to do with the fail rates? Do we look at employees who are the ones who are constantly failing and have to make changes there, more direct interventions? And the same thing would be said for those employees who aren't reporting the email. If we're already not reaching the targets on the other two, maybe we want to address those before we start going, okay, now the next step of really trying to get full compliance is we want to see all of these reported as a target, but really we have those kind of first level targets we need to reach before we go to that next step of trying to enforce compliance.
Page 12 has the annual training on-time completion. One quick question, what was considered on time? What was the window of time everyone has to complete the test?
It's 3 weeks.
3 weeks. And
It's also ongoing, but this metric just shows the kickoff in July. So as new employees get hired, they automatically get added in, and they have 3 weeks from that time as well.
Okay,
This is really just reflecting the annual training.
that's become part of the onboarding requirements now, is to do this. Very good.
Can you tell us on that slide 12, the people who are non-compliant, how often do you tap the supervisor and/or manager director of that area, or all three of them, to say, hey, by the way, this isn't done, you were expected to get it done by X, Y, Z? Is that frequent enough so that we can, as leaders, can take action against those employees that aren't completing it and force them to sit down and just go through the training?
So there's multiple levels of escalation that happen automatically, and then there's 1 or 2 levels that happen manually. So the system does an initial email to the employee, then it does a reminder to the employee. I believe it's after 1 week. The supervisor gets an escalation email after 2 weeks, and then 5 days before it's due, they get another escalation. So there's 4 separate emails that go out between the employee and the supervisor. After that, ER follows up based on what they see beyond that of people that haven't completed it, so they're following up manually with emails and I think sometimes phone calls. I'm not sure if they call people all the time, but for sure they're reaching out via email to say, hey, you haven't completed this training, we need to get this done. So there's 4 levels of automatic escalation and at least 1 more level of manual escalation. We don't, the one thing I think to your question is the escalation really goes up 1 level of management. Just the last 3 months, based on direction from governance, I've been sending out the list to the division heads of all of the people too. That's only been happening now the last 3 months, I think.
So one other question I had around all of the IT security measures, all of them really focused on email, which is great. There's a lot of good data here. I'm wondering though, beyond email, is there an effort to look at texts that come in and kind of starting to track about the security threat of either text or other forms that we should start collecting data on beyond just kind of the email campaign?
That's a good question. You're talking text messages on your phone? We don't have much visibility of that currently. All of the text messages come through the carrier, so in our case, Verizon. We don't really have much visibility of what's coming in, what the risks are. Hopefully, at some point in the future, we'll have better capabilities there. We have no capability of even tracking that today. There are definitely risks, though, I agree with you. It's a blind spot for us today.
So what benefit add has Schneider Downs? So this is a company that we've hired, contracted with, to provide us that next set of eyes to say, here's your policies, this is what you're doing. I don't know, have they provided enough feedback to us to say, Scott County, you're lacking in these areas and you need to get on board with, on implementing these, and whether it's additional training or whatever the situation is, to ensure that security period from both cybersecurity and attacks through email and or some attacks in other fashions, like some type of attack through your network, you're secure enough to prohibit these attackers from getting in. What value add have they provided us, and what type of information have they given us that we're kind of sitting on, and why?
Okay. Let's see. So from a product standpoint, a tool standpoint, there's at least three things in there mentioned in the write-up and the narrative. So we did implement Carbon Black. I think most of you are aware of that. That was one of the recommendations from Schneider Downs that kind of happened when the whole incident happened. We rolled that out right away. They have 2 other recommendations that we've brought forward but haven't been approved yet. One is Advanced Threat Protection, which is another email piece through Microsoft that helps look at phishing emails that are coming in. It's checking links, it's checking content against known threat vectors. It's doing things like also checking if somebody sends an email as Cindy Geis and it's not really Cindy Geis, it's pulling that out and saying, hold on, this is somebody trying to impersonate Cindy. You should pay attention to this and block that, up front. So that's the second one. The third one is the Password Vault, which was another we had in the queue already, and they also agreed with that recommendation. Those are 2 that haven't been approved yet. They went to governance and haven't been approved through governance yet. In addition to that, we've done a few application security scans. We scanned GIS early this year. As you're aware, we scanned Recordees before that went live. So they're looking at some of those. We're trying to schedule those as applications are going live, especially the ones that are external. So they're scanning those to make sure that they're protected and they're secure. We have not gotten to a full network scan with them yet from a timing standpoint. That's one of the next steps that we have to do, is get that scheduled and get that assessment done as well. So we've had lots of conversations with them, both outside of the security incident and then obviously during the security incident, on specific things that they're recommending we should be doing, products that we should be implementing, things like that. Did I miss?
So can you talk about what goes into like the Nist assessment?
Yeah, so the Nist assessment is part of where we want to start with them, although we've had a lot of things happen outside of that. What the Nist assessment is it's a standards organization supported through the federal government that produces standards. It's like the ISO, or it's like organizations like that set standards. Nist is more technology focused, and they have a standard set of policies and procedures that organizations should follow in terms of being well protected and making sure that you're addressing the common things that are threats to an organization. So that's usually the first step, is to go through that Nist assessment, but it's pretty extensive. I think there's 180 items in the Nist assessment, and we've provided feedback on about 50% of those so far. So we've been trying to get that finished so that they can come in and do the assessment for or with us and walk through all of their results. So that's something that's kind of in process right now, but it's been a little bit slow in getting that done. But that is used then to really give us a standpoint of where we are today and say, okay, here's your scorecard for today, and here's where we think you should be, and here's the steps to go from where you are today to where you should be. And it's things like policies and procedures, like what is your password policy, and is it up to standard, and do you need to enhance your password policy? What is your onboarding and offboarding process for employees, and what does that look like, and what should that look like? How long do you retain data in a certain area that should be secured in a different way? It's all of those kind of things, as well as the physical security of the network and email and stuff like that. So that's a big step that we still have on the plate to complete with them.
In addition to that, one of the components of what they're doing is penetration testing as well, that they will be doing, which is looking for vulnerabilities in the system, looking for vulnerabilities, whether it's human vulnerabilities of how are we storing passwords, social engineering, but also just brute force attacks, which is they're trying to break into our network and are the things that they see that we should change that would allow for things. So even in the malware attack, one of the things that we hope their penetration testing would identify is certain things just technically we should be disabling or enabling on the system that would prevent certain things, and that's what the penetration testing is designed to do. The onboarding, though, was to look at the Nist assessment first and complete some of those base level things before getting into that penetration testing.
So would you say, like using your scorecard analogy, Jeff, so there's some work to do yet, right? There's this assessment, there'll be more work to do on that. But the consequences of that malware episode were pretty significant. I mean, it was expensive. Your team was down for 2 days, 2.5 days, or some of your team.
Some of them.
And so, like, based on what we learned through that process, are we like safer today?
Yeah, I would say definitely I feel more comfortable today. Are we where we want to be? No. But carbon black, I think, is a big component to that, and that's one of the reasons why they really stressed getting that installed
Right away.
As we did. Because that tool really does fill in a gap that we had previously with our antivirus. So it is looking at not just signature antivirus, which is if I see something that I've seen before, I can identify it. This tool is looking at not just those types of threats, but it's also looking at behavioral threats. This application is doing something that it normally shouldn't do, or this application is reaching out to a host outside the network that really is a known bad host, and we think this might be a problem. That's the next gen type of tool that Carbon Black is it's looking at more behavioral based things that are happening on your computer, and most of us don't even know that they're happening. Versus the traditional antivirus, which is just looking at, oh, this file I've seen before and I know it's bad, so I'm not going to let that run. Those traditional antivirus tools, they're still effective because those threats still exist as well, but the latest threats that are happening now from hackers are way beyond your signatures. They are very competent at bypassing all of their traditional antivirus. And in fact, there's toolkits now for hackers that say, oh, you want to deploy this malware? Here, run it through this tool, and we'll tell you all of the antiviruses that catch it and how to fix your tool so these antiviruses will bypass. So a lot of the traditional antivirus tools they're only a small portion now, where they used to be the prime protection that we would have. Now they're just like a smaller piece, and next-gen tools like Carbon Black are really the fill that gap of the next wave of antivirus or malware that comes through.
I know one component of risk management is scenario planning, kind of what ifs. What if we had a ransomware situation? What if we had a data breach and we have a lot of data? Without going to a lot of specifics, do you feel as an organization that we're prepared and we've kind of scenarioed out different situations to the point where if it does happen, we kind of know what the protocols are gonna be and what the decision-making is gonna be when we're faced with those situations.
I'll say just generally no, but I don't think it's unique to just that part of the organization. We're doing a pretty comprehensive review of how we responded to this incident to look at what went well, what didn't go well, what will we change in the future. I would say we're actually fortunate and not fortunate, both the timing and the size of the event. We're in the middle of training our senior leadership team on how to do NIMS assessment, and that would have been very, very valuable in this response if we had been more fully engaged with that and more fully trained, and that was part of just our operating practices. I don't think we're there as an org yet in how that works, but I think we responded well. I think that there are ways that we could improve though in the future.
I want to shift topics. Okay. We'll go to the financial. We haven't been able to hear from Steve. The page 17, the credit bond rating, very impressive over the last several years with the AAA rating. My question is, how are we going to keep that rating in the future? Or what's out there that could jeopardize this kind of rating? What are some things you're seeing in the future that maybe jeopardizes that type of stellar rating?
A lot of things internally that we can control, we try to keep an eye on as far as make sure our policies, procedures are up to date and that they're as strong as they need to be to keep our finances in the right position. So we make sure to always go through at a high level monthly to see where are we operating from a expense and revenue perspective, and then at a quarterly time frame we go through and project where do we see ourselves at year end. One of the main areas that a rating agency looks for is how solvent are you, how have you done on an annual basis for both your revenues and expenses from actuals to budget. They want to make sure that as an organization you're able to handle some of the economic downturns that could occur. So we always try to have our 5-year plans, both from a financial, CIP, debt perspectives, to really see what do we see out in the future for ourselves. Some of the things that make it a little more difficult for a credit rating is the external economy. We don't have a lot of control on that, but what benefits us is we are, within Scott County, we are very diversified in the different type of businesses that we have. So that benefits us at this time, and we hope to stay more diversified there.
The other thing I would say is that we have looked at internal policies to improve. So it's hard to reflect when ratings agencies report you as AAA, and it's the same thing. But even in our most recent bond rating back in February, March, when we were getting ready to issue the debt, different components in that rating actually went up because of policies we had passed before. That doesn't get reflected in the rating when it stays the same, but those are things we can look at. So when they're doing their calculations as where are we at, if the economy isn't as strong, have we really tightened up those other policies, those things that we can control, the fund balance, those sorts of things that allow us to weather a poor economy and maintain a bond rating. The other thing is just the size of the economy here in Scott County. That's something we can't really control in the size of our organization. Large organizations can handle changes in what's going on a little bit better if it's the same size as what we have. You know, $1 million change for us is a lot bigger than $1 million change for like a Hennepin County. Those are things we can't control, but really those policies, making sure that they're as strong as possible, help us weather some of the things we can't control.
So looking at and you don't have it in here, but I just have seen it through some of the presentations that both the board and the public have seen, and that is when we look at our fund balance and making sure that we have a sufficient fund balance that's going to be able to pay for things in a time period where we kind of have a cash drought. So that January through till about we start collecting taxes at the end of April, we're kind of running on our reserves, and as our operating budget continues to grow, have we planned sufficient an amount of money going into our fund balance to keep us within the threshold that will keep us healthy?
So we don't plan for money to go to fund balance, but we do take a conservative approach to budgeting. So we overestimate expenditures, underestimate revenues by a little bit. So that's why typically over the last several years, and I think there's a slide here about our fund balance going up.
Page 18.
And so that approach to budgeting creates benefits to the fund balance. That's how our fund balance has been allowed to grow up, just from that. We try not to tax for fund balance use. It's just not a practice we really want to get into. But also we have policies in place that if in our 5-year model we show our fund balance going too low, we are required under policy to show how are we going to address that. So it would be then we have to adjust things in that model to say, yes, we are going to be budgeting and having to tax in year 5. We usually don't get anywhere close to it, but to just put money into fund balance to make sure that we are fluid in that area. We look at it probably, 4 or 5 times a year to make sure as things change that we're still looking good in that 5-year model.
So one of the other things that I thought about is, as we hear some of the really horrible situations that are going on in our public schools, in our private schools, in our businesses, and other local governments, and actually anywhere, in movie theaters, where you have people probably with mental illness coming through, and they have a mass situation that is, just trauma across so many different people's lives, and it's heartfelt. And as I continue to see on the news, and we just had this in Wisconsin, the potential, up northern part of Minnesota, potential, with possible shooter, what steps are we looking at to ensure that our citizens, our residents, and the people that work, at least in our facilities, are protected? I read in your narrative that, I know the first floor we have wide open. Anybody can walk in, they can walk through any of our offices, it's wide open, and we're gonna try to do that. But what other types of things are we putting in place to ensure that we're scrutinizing the people that walk into our facilities to keep people safe?
I want to say from a security aspect, and the building and the new construction, there was a lot of discussion and a lot of really good discussion about and revisiting those areas where they had made some decisions about some controls and having meetings in places that are a little bit more guarded and protected. And I think that the communication that was going on during those meetings was really good, and I think they were really responsive to those things. And I think a lot of security measures were followed up with because of those committee meetings and those discussions. So I think from a physical standpoint, and I'm just speaking from those meetings and those those decisions that were made, a lot of things have been taken into consideration to get clients into a better place. So if something does happen, that people don't find themselves on an island, and to ensure that we don't, that some of those areas where we work don't become passive participants in something that goes wrong, right? So if something does go wrong, it's isolated to this area, and suddenly we don't have people sitting in their offices having somebody running around inside. So that security is going to be very, very helpful, at least for the new building. And I think ultimately when people start looking at those kinds of security measures, like we're talking about, that those pieces of glass that keep somebody from reaching in and things like that, the more those are introduced into our workplace, I think the more people start seeing the value in that and start looking at, well, when we move to this area or that area and we're going to do some remodeling, how can we sort of emulate that in this remodeling project, right? So that's just from a security standpoint, from personal safety, right?
How do you see the Everbridge notification system certainly being a part of employee safety and potentially resident safety?
Everbridge is an interesting thing because it's a lot bigger project than even people who brought it on board really thought it was going to be. There's all kinds of questions about how you would use Everbridge, make sure it doesn't end up becoming a routine communication thing, because remember, if it becomes routine, nobody's paying attention to it at all anyhow. So we have to really balance what we're going to send over it, what is natural to send over it. And so the discussions are ongoing, and also we are now looking at getting together a group who are discussing when something happens, who has the knowledge about that and who can put out that notification. We had just recently in the summer, we had a fire that took place just a block away from the main government center. And there was some confusion about, well, should we put something out over Everbridge telling everybody this isn't involving anything with any of the government center stuff? And so we learned from that, and we met and we talked about that. But some of the other things that we want to try to do is we want to work with the law enforcement side to create groups that can be called out for certain things. We want to work with highway maintenance to have groups that can be called out for plowing. Public health nurses, I'm talking with them right now. We're going to have a group for them to call out public health nursing. We're right now having to take a look at what our numbers are and possibly contracting for a higher number of seats on that system. But ultimately, this system should be being used a lot more for those types of things. When something's a concern that we need everybody's attention on immediately, we can put that out, and I hope that answers your question somewhat.
I would add to what he's saying about, with the changes to the building, I think there's a couple things that we need to be doing. One is formal training, run, hide, fight, that sort of thing. But even more important, I think, is some cultural change, because you talked about your area's open and everyone come through. The entire building's a lot like that. Not every area, but there's a lot of places where people could walk through and just kind of meander for a long time. And we don't really have a culture right now to question someone that they don't necessarily recognize and say, hey, can I help you? What are you doing back there? I just know that from being fairly new to the org and people not knowing me and being able to wander all over the place.
And you really look suspicious.
And so that kind of tailgater syndrome, people not being able to just follow in saying, hey, can I see your badge? We've already changed where people are supposed to be displaying their badges and making sure that they can see them. I think I actually have mine on today, because usually 50-50 chance I forgot it. But some of those behavioral and cultural changes where we have our supervisors and our managers going, hey, make sure you have your badge on, seeing someone, letting someone tailgate, go, hey, they don't have their badge. I know this person, but what if you didn't? Would you have just let them through just because they were right behind you and acted like they knew where they were going?
I just think in general, when we're talking about risk management, with anything, it's not just one or two things that it's going to solve this. It's really a multifaceted approach. It's the policies, it's the training, it's the bridge systems, it's what we do at point of entry. It's all of those combinations, and that we have to continue to talk about it, because what's working today might be different next month or next year, and the conversation just continues to how we need to continue to update that and not become complacent in thinking that it's okay.
I'd piggyback on what Danny said. A lot of people may not know, I have anywhere from 9 or 10 to 12 deputies working a day in the courthouse, and we respond to calls throughout the government center complex, all the buildings. And if you see somebody suspicious, and I serve from a supervisor to let their employees know, don't hesitate to call the sheriff's office, because we have a lot of deputies specifically in that building that can break free and come. And they're supposed to be making rounds in the other buildings too, and make employees comfortable that they see some brown walking around, and we will definitely come over and confront that person if you don't want to. Call dispatch, call 911, let your supervisor know, and they can call us down at the point of entry. And our little point of entry, there's always 2 deputies down there, and I consider that our little dispatch center. We quite often get calls from employees for assistance, whether it be lock my keys in the car, my car's dead, need a jump start. We do it all. And if you call the point of entry, and the deputy always answers the phone. You call the point of entry between 7 and 5. And if you tell them, hey, there's a suspicious looking person, and we've had those calls too, and we responded to them. If you don't want to confront the person, we sure will. That's our job. We've got a lot of experience doing that and are comfortable with it.
Can I ask some more questions on slide 23? So about the Everbridge, it looks like there's improvement, but still a large number of employees not confirmed. And so do we have a sense of what is underneath that?
Well, so it can be kind of deceiving, because we have telecommuters who may not confirm it, who may not be at their actual desk or their home area at the time. There's all kinds of different reasons why people might not confirm it. And sometimes it's the fact that they don't have the right things registered. It defaults registers your desk phone and your email, and as many communications is we send out saying, you want to update this with your cell phone or the application. There are some people who just haven't done it since the first email. So we can't make people register the right things, and so their email's going off saying there's a fire in, this building. And if they're not at their desk, they're not getting their email, or if they don't have it on their, so some of those numbers reflect that. And I'm not as alarmed about those as long as those numbers keep going down. We have more people who are buying in and changing those things. And then we have lots of turnover employees too. So, and not in a bad way, but that means that those people are, and so one of the other things that we have to look at is maybe, one of the things that I'm actually looking at is including in their onboarding up in employee relations, doing a safety onboarding with them to explain how the Everbridge is used, walking them through where they can find it, as well as our workplace health and safety policies, ensuring they understand what our part is and what our office actually can do, what resources we can provide, and then letting them know when they go to their specific departments, there'll be other safety things that they're going to be oriented on.
I would also piggyback that, making sure that people understand that they need to respond. They hear the fire alarm go off, they go outside, somebody's looking at their phone, they see the all clear, everyone goes in, but that there's importance to making sure everyone knows, hey, and then go and at least respond and say, yes, you got this notification. But I think it's a challenge across everybody up here that response is, how many notifications do you have? How many things do you have to respond to? How many trainings do you have to go through for this security piece? And I think it's a challenge just getting people to do all of those things and continue to do their regular day-to-day job as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Danny. I did have one additional question about Everbridge, though. So it sounds like because of some of the reporting complications that you laid out really nicely, Kevin, that our data around this is going to be wonky, at least for a while. So I'm wondering, is there any kind of debriefing after a drill or an incident to look into what happened? Like some of you, I hope I was not alone, but there was the whole thing about, is this a fire drill or a tornado drill this summer?
Right.
And so are there incident debriefings to look at how this system is working? Because we're paying for it, so are we getting value for it?
That's a great question, because after every one of those drills or after every one of those incidences, there is we sit down and take a look at what went right, what went wrong. And actually, some of those things have been changed. I've gone into the system itself and changed how those notifications are done, or whether or not we require on an all clear, would we require somebody to identify or acknowledge that? And maybe that's a step we don't need to do. Maybe we can be more pragmatic about how the system works. So we do look at those things, and we look at whether or not we did the right thing. The one issue you're talking about, I think that's where you get sort of that, you're in the middle of a couple of different systems. There was a speaker system, now we have the Everbridge system. And we did something where a drill went off for a fire drill, and we sent out an Everbridge message saying this is a fire drill. But then we take a look at that and said, would that really happen in real life? No, that wouldn't happen. And what we ended up with is people in the hallway standing around waiting for either Everbridge or a speaker announcement, even though there was a fire alarm going. And ever since we've been in kindergarten.
I know.
Ever since you're in kindergarten, you know.
About that, but.
And the siren that goes wah, 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 that's the one that tells you about weather. The one that goes ding-a-ling-a-ling, that's the alarm for fire, And so we're down in the hallway thinking there's a storm, and I think people just got cross confusion because there was a storm outside. There was a fire drill going on inside. We decided Everbridge doesn't do fire alarms because those are immediate things we need you to get out of here. We'll do the all clear for that. So there's just that convergence. Yeah, that was something we looked at. We sort of dissected that whole thing and said, you could not plan on that. That is just human nature, right? So.
But there is a debriefing process
we do
that
look
we're
at that.
learning from.
And every time it gets better, I think. The system gets better. Thank you.
Is there any kind of communication back, like with unit supervisors to know, are their employees actually connected so that if somehow a new employee gets missed, supervisor knows to follow up to help them get connected?
I do have supervisors who contact me and say, can you give me a list of the people from my department who are not registered right now or who haven't updated their registration? And I can offer them those lists. when I first came on board, I ended up getting a hold of everybody and telling them, you have quite a few people that aren't registered, after I sent like the second set. And then I had people come back and go, well, give me that list. And so people can do that for sure. And then typically, like you said, when we do that debriefing and we figure out what went wrong, typically I'll send out an email saying, just a reminder, you know, the weather horn is the weather horn and the fire alarm is the fire alarm, right?
I like the sound effects.
Yeah, well. You like that, Joe?
All right, maybe we'll just take a break for a moment and see if there are questions from the audience. Nate, you have brand new performance measures.
Yes, brand new.
You'll be
Still
reporting
haven't
on-
taken them out of the package yet.
You'll be reporting on those next time you're here?
Yes, indeed.
Great.
But with that, what are the things that you've learned? I mean, you've been in this industry, we didn't have one, right? And so it's like, ooh, we'll get the guy in here who's gonna kinda teach us the goods, the bads, and the outs. Can you just give us a couple, just what have you kind of learned over the course of your whole 3 or 4 months here?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, my perspective, my frame of reference is military, so, you know, it's a much larger organization with much tighter rules and controls and orders. You know, I'm used to an environment where you can't be told what to do, and there are severe consequences, and they're immediate, and, for the most part, when there's, you know, compliance needs, they're met quite quickly and with very few, we would say cats and dogs to chase down and herd up and get everybody in line. So there's a lot of room to grow in a lot of different areas, as Jeff kind of talked about and alluded to, you know, oftentimes with the data security and preventing breaches and intrusions and things like that. We've got all the good technical pieces that build the walls of the fort, but it's the people that walk in and out of the door that might not be paying attention that we need to get to. So the good things, the know before training, absolutely blown away about how great that was. I know people don't like to sit in an in-person class and be lectured to about how, you know, don't click on phishing emails and that's bad, and you know, don't go out to internet sites that you shouldn't be visiting. They would rather kind of, you know, go through this little computer-based training every year, and you know, if we test them and then they miss it, okay, well, let's go back and do a little more training kind of thing. So that's good. We have a lot of paper data, I've noticed. A lot of paper data. And I know that there's not a singular push to say, well, you know, let's not ever have any paper. There are certainly so many areas where we don't have complete policies and even permission to go from something that needs a wet ink signature, needs to be printed out. But I'm blown away by a lot of the groups that have just kind of taken it upon themselves to look for ways to not be so bound up in paper. And that makes our ability to respond to data requests and other things that happen through legal operations, it makes it a lot easier. So yeah, that's kind of what I've seen so far. So far, so good.
I would just like to add, I think what I've seen since Nate has been here is the staff that reach out to him and they want to know the answers, they want to ask the questions, they've been looking for this kind of support to help with, what should I save, what do I have to give out, certainly have been surprised at already how many contacts he's made and how many people are just calling him up and asking questions, so I think that's really, really fantastic. The other thing that, you know, with a new position and we're learning as we go here, sometimes when we uncover those rocks, it's like, okay, let's put those back. Let's put those back down, but once you turn them over, you gotta look at them. So the other things, you know, Nate's really been diving into how we're storing our paper and what we've been storing and uncovering things that we've been storing for years. And do we really need to store that, or can some of that just be you know, we can get rid of some of that stuff because, you know, once we put it away, it's out of sight, out of mind. But so there's going to be quite a few of those kinds of projects that I see that he'll be really diving into and talking with folks about as we continue to move forward. So it's been exciting, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, all of you. Madam Chair?
Thank you. Questions from the board or comments?
Sure thing.
Someone has a comment. Wow. Yes, Commissioner Beard.
I mean, somebody has to go with that, right?
Yeah.
This is more in interest of full disclosure with the know before testing. Some of us wait for 2 or 3 of those emails to come and a poke to say, hey, you need to get on this test. Then I mean, that person knows it's real and can therefore take that test. It's me, yeah. It's me. So then okay, I know it's legit. I know it's, so that's just a little interest of full disclosure. On the comfort level, there was a question asked about the issue we had earlier. Hey, do we have a better comfort level? And it's always fun. I hate to give away my little, when I look for up here, body language, see where the heads are turning. What's the lag between the question being asked and the answer? It was pretty quick. There was a quick turn on the comfort level of some of the things that took us down for a couple days. So we spent a ton of money with consultants, and I think Cindy maybe asked the question of, are they helping us with, so I'm just going to dovetail if it wasn't exactly that question, are they helping us with the next steps, or is it just the nuts and bolts? Because there was a question on, well, do we do something with governance? Do we do something with options? Do we shut off email? Do they collectively have that expertise to help us in that, or are we, plugging in cords and boxes and green flashing lights that are trying to detect intrusion, and we're up to the governance stuff on our own? Do they bring that to the table with what we already signed on for, or is that a, oh, by the way, a la carte type of service?
It's a little of both, I would say. There definitely are areas where they're advising us on policy and procedure type things. I think a lot of times the recommendations that they make run into issues with us of how fast can we move, how fast can we change policy, how fast can we update documentation, that kind of thing. Definitely a lot of their focus is on the nuts and bolts and saying, you guys should really be looking at these tools, or you should be looking at these specific, like Danny mentioned, shutting off certain protocols, those types of things. There's definitely a lot of that they're helping us with. We're going to, I think, over the next probably year, we will spend a lot more time on the other side of it, which is policy and procedure, more about looking at the future and how we're growing and things like that. I think a lot more time will be spent there in the future.
As a follow-up to that, is it something that we are slowing down the process of making change, or is there something we can do to help speed some of these things along if they're necessary steps that need to be implemented, or is it just the nature of the beast?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Are you talking?
Well, if there's a
you as the
policy
board,
change,
or?
yeah, is it something, well, we got to get it before these guys, and yada, yada,
I
yada?
don't think we've run into anything that.
It's not the board. So when we talk about policy and procedure changes, we talk about adding inefficiency into the operations. And we have to have a good understanding of what are the risks. And I wouldn't be doing Jennifer justice if we didn't talk about, it's not about mitigating risk, it's about understanding and saying, how are we going to address that? And so as we look at these changes, how's it going to impact how people work? How's it going to impact other systems that we have? And so looking at that holistically and saying, and an active decision of, we're going to not allow this anymore, understanding that these employees are not going to be able to do something they've always been able to do. And so really looking at that to bring forward, this is going to be our policy, or this is going to be our procedure. I think that's the piece where we need to take the right amount of time to do that and have the right decision.
And that's fair. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't somehow, because I know we've talked about that in different workshops, and that makes sense, and I completely get that. I just don't want to be the hindrance.
Good to live by. Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Beard.
I'm hesitant because you might have talked about this, Jeff, but that two-step authentication thing, are you satisfied that it's actually sieving anything out? And
Absolutely. I don't have metrics that we've shown in the past, but definitely when I go and look at the logs now, it's very easy to just see all of the attempts that are coming, like from Russia or from Saudi Arabia or whatever. I mean, you can see those are blocked right up front. There's no question that nobody's getting in from those areas anymore. In the past, before we had implemented that, I could cite probably 1 to 2 accounts per quarter that were either potentially compromised or compromised before we implemented 2FA. So definitely everything is a lot cleaner now. It's a lot more secure. We are blocking all of that stuff that really should be blocked. And now it's just a matter of looking at a few incidents where, was this person really traveling? Were they really in Florida? Were they really, in California? And all of the incidents, or all of the cases like that I've seen since we've implemented 2FA have all been legitimate. So yep, this person was really traveling, this person was really in this state, whatever. So, we haven't seen any instances where there's been even a potential compromise that hasn't been proved valid.
And just a tongue-in-cheek comment, Jeff, that threat to turn off my email if I don't comply may not be seen as a threat.
I understood that maybe for some commissioners that would be a welcome thing. Is that all I have to do? Okay.
Just saying. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Ulrich.
So if the person from the general public was walking on our campus somewhere and saw a safety concern, I don't think they'd have a clue who to call or who to tell. And if by some process they identified somebody, it wouldn't be very quick. Is there some phone numbers that should be posted or is it just 911? Or, nobody's going to want to call 911 if it's a slippery sidewalk, I don't think. But is there something, if you identified top half a dozen threats or safety concerns, and said in the event of, have some phone numbers, would that be helpful or not?
So I think we could post a phone number to facilities or to Kevin, but I also think that if a member of the public sees something that is a safety concern, they should just tell any staff member, and my hope is those staff members would either contact facilities or contact ER and say, hey, this person saw this, can you take a look at it?
And I have had, at least over the summer, we've had several of them calls come up to the employee relations from people from customer service, from people from land records that said this person just saw this, and so that has really been helpful. But you might be right, something more formal at the door that they might be able to submit might be smarter. But yeah, we're open, and I've had people grab me and say, hey, I want you to see this, so. They do have a voice, and they have communicated that. But you're right, a more formal.
People do call dispatch too for concerns around the courthouse and any building on campus. And you'd be surprised what people call dispatch for. They get every question, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to have it posted the non-emergency number. Because dispatch knows where to direct everybody's call in the county. If it's a facilities related question, they forward it to the on-call facilities person. A lot of times they'll call me and ask, who should this call go to? But so people do call quite often with concerns about anything on the government side.
So you could have just emergency 911, not emergency, one number, you'd be the clearinghouse. That seems clear.
Yep, yeah. You can call for the non-emergency 445-1411. And people call that number. It's hilarious sometimes. What they ask dispatch to do and what they call.
Any further questions? I want to thank you all. It's a huge topic with no real parameters. Risk management, it's everywhere. What I really appreciate over the past 3 years is the change in the conversation to really look at all the risks, but then to help us understand and hopefully other people understand that we're not making decisions just, in a vacuum, really looking at sometimes maybe we're not going to mitigate a risk because it would change productivity, it would impair employees too much. And I think that's important conversation to have, to acknowledge it, to own it. And there's going to be a lot more change. Just sitting here thinking about how, and many of us alluded to this, email can't be the only way to reach people, especially with our employees that we kind of want them doing all kinds of things, not just checking emails. So there's other ways to reach people, and I can see that you're already starting to think about that. And then finally, I like the comments about not adding work for all 782 employees. Let's just figure out who really needs the help to comply and mitigate those risks, because too often as an organization, I think we add steps that make it more work for everyone, when maybe most people are doing what they're supposed to do. We just need to help those who aren't and figure out why. So thank you for your time, for your expertise, for continuing to work on this and make this a better place. So, thank you. All right, we will go on to item number 7. Actually, we're going to recess for about 8 minutes. We'll recess till 4:20 for room reconfiguration.
Facility guys, when I talk to them about their stuff, they are super responsive. Good. Yeah.
I'm going to reconvene the December 5th, 2019 meeting of the Scott County Board of Commissioners. We're on to item number 7, which is our consent agenda. These are items that have been previously discussed, previously workshopped, and considered by other committees. Unless an item is pulled from the consent agenda, these will pass or be considered with one motion. I'll go ahead and read the proposals for the consent agenda. Item 7.1, to approve the receipt of funds for the Drug-Free Communities Support Program and additional 1.4 full-time equivalent staff. 7.2, to approve the grant application to UCare for $99,428 and the acceptance of the funds if awarded. 7.3, to approve the service agreement with Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative for the Families Moving Forward Southwest program in the amount of $115,000 for services January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. 7.4, to authorize the release of requests for applications for 2020 Recycling Infrastructure Innovation and Outreach Grants and 2020 City Organic Recycling Collection Grant. Item 7.5, to adopt resolution number 2019-167, authorizing a cooperative agreement for preventive trail maintenance and joint purchasing with the cities within Scott County and other surrounding area cities. Item 7.6, to adopt resolution number 2019-168, authorizing the acceptance of bids for the sale and removal of a single-family house from 6921 Egan Drive in the city of Savage. Item 7.7, to adopt resolution number 2019-169, certifying final approved appraisal of value for certain land acquisitions and authorizing acquisition by expedited eminent domain proceedings for County Project CP 42-19 located in the cities of Prior Lake and Shakopee. Item 7.8, to approve the request for preliminary plat and final plat of Mullenmeister Edition, Daniel and Catherine Mullenmeister applicants, and John and Patricia Mullenmeister property owners, consisting of 2 lots on 6.34 acres in Section 9 of Spring Lake Township. 7.9, to authorize staff to sign and cancel the letter of credit for Nexio Solutions LLC, previously located at 4401 Valley Industrial Boulevard South in Shakopee. 7.10, to approve renewal applications for Scott County intoxicating liquor, brewery, and wine licenses for 2020 within the Scott County townships. Item 7.11, to adopt resolution number 2019-166, approving a 3-year agreement between the County of Scott and the Law Enforcement Labor Services Incorporated, Local 332, Sheriff Essential Licensed Sergeant Unit, effective January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2022, and rescinding resolution number 2016-206. And 7.12, to approve payroll processing of personnel actions. These are the 12 items on the consent agenda. Are there any items you would like pulled for further discussion and consideration? Commissioner Beer.
Madam Chair, I'd like to pull 7.7.
All right. Any others? Commissioner Beard.
Madam Chair, I have a brief question for staff about 7.6, but I don't necessarily want to pull it. May I ask?
Please do.
Either to Lisa or Leslie. There are 2 or 3 houses along that piece, that stretch that have driveways. Are we going to take them all eventually, or will taking this one allow us to actually fix the driveway problem on the other one?
We actually have been working towards moving all of the driveways off there to get the access off of that highway. That would be the intent.
It would be. So this one's up for sale, and, well, we have a bid, but the other ones haven't been posted yet then?
Correct. It's as they become willing sellers. It's how we've been purchasing them along Marshall Road and along 42. Just like the original ones in Prior Lake. So as they become available and people have wanted to move, Randy's let it known that we're interested in purchasing it. So it's a willing seller.
Willing seller, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
And just as a point of clarification, on 7.7, I mean, I've had discussions with Lisa on this, so we don't need a discussion if you don't want. I just wanted to vote on that separately.
You want separate vote?
That's,
Yeah.
whatever you
Right.
prefer.
Madam
And-
Chair, I'll move approval with the exception of 7.7. Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the 11 items on the consent agenda, all listed except 7.7. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. So let's move on to 7.7. Commissioner Beer, you don't have any questions or comments about it?
I mean, Lisa and I have had a discussion over the last couple of days, so
I think, do any of the other commissioners have any questions, comments? want to know more about Commissioner Beer's concerns?
Madam Chair, no. I understand how this works in the whole quick take process, so I am comfortable moving to adopt resolution 2019-169.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved in second, oh,
And if Commissioner Beer wants to comment on it, great, otherwise,
Great.
no, I'm good.
all right. It's been moved in second to adopt resolution number 2019-169, certifying final approved appraisal of value for certain land acquisitions and authorizing acquisition by expedited eminent domain proceedings for County Project ZP 42-19. Any further discussion or comments to be made on this matter?
Maybe it would be helpful, Madam Chair, maybe it would be helpful just to say, by the quick take process, that doesn't mean that the price is done. It means we fix a price, we pay them, we're in doing the work, so the project stays on hand. But the process can continue to either negotiate or have the court set a price in the eminent domain process.
So, right, this would begin and set a date for possession. What it really does is ensures that this project can get constructed
Yes.
in the year 2020 during one season. We will continue to negotiate with both property owners through the process until it goes to a condemnation hearing.
Thank you. That being said, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Opposed?
Motion carried. Thank you. We're on to item number 8, which is committee reports and commissioner updates. Commissioner Wolf, would you get us started?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the 19th, I attended they had a meeting out at Credit River. It was like an open house for the 2191 intersection. There was about 80 to 100 people out there, very concerned about what is going on out there. They actually, and I've been at lots of open houses, things like this, and they actually started chanting that they wanted a roundabout. That was new. Anyhow, we'll see what happens out there, but everybody's, they do want it to be a safer intersection out there, and that's what we want to. On the 21st, the Metropolitan Mosquito Control, we had our executive meeting. The big thing out there was pesticides and legislation coming up in the next year. On the 22nd, we had the planning workshop over in Savage. On the 25th, I met with the administrator for a monthly meeting. After that, the WMO had a short meeting. One big thing happened there, Jim Swingler, the chair, is termed out, so he has to sit off the board for a year, and he can get back on, but that was his last meeting until he gets reappointed if he so chooses. On the 26th, the JAF, Juvenile Alternative Facility, had their Thanksgiving lunch out there. A lot of people out there, very good dinner, a lot of nice people out there I talked to. So, on the 2nd, Prior Lake had their city council workshop and meeting. Credit River also had their monthly meeting, and I was out at Cedar Lake Township that night also. Big thing on those, Cedar Lake is has a resident who would like to put in a helicopter port so that he can go, I think it's to and from work, but he, I think, says pleasure, but we'll see what happens. It was going to be on the Planning Commission meeting on Monday night, but it has been pulled so that he can get do some further work on that. On the 3rd, Newmarket Township met, pretty quiet out there. Last night, the Renaissance had just a little like appreciation type informational thing out at the Wilds, pretty well attended there. After that, I was at the Belle Plaine for an annexation meeting on a piece of property that is owned by Bill Chard. And then this afternoon, we had a meeting, a few of us, about the putting in, we're gonna put a mural on the wall at the new government center. It's about, I think, 20 by 20, something in that range, and so we're gonna advertise that for somebody to give us some ideas and paint that wall. So it's gonna be a big project and be something right inside the doorway that people will see when they get in there. So it's a really big thing. So that is my report.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Beer.
Thank you. On the 19th, attended the IWG. On the 20th, Guild fundraiser, hopefully in support of our ERTs to be coming very, very soon. 21st, Community Corrections Advisory Board, and Molly sat us into small groups and said, hey, what do you guys want to see here? So it was a very engaging, interactive committee meeting. I think the people really appreciated being asked that question and jumping in. 22nd was the planning workshop. I forgot my chair that day. On the 26th, chair, vice chair, and today I sat in for Mr. Wolf of Vermilion Watershed, and I need to present him with his Save the Turtle stainless steel straw that they gave me in your place, and I'm making sure that I give that to you as you are the main liaison to that board.
I've been waiting for so long for this straw. I have missed 2 meetings. This would have been the second one today out of 11 some years, because I was at another meeting today I want to be at. And then they give this out, the first time they've given something out.
Man, they gave me a big meal. They said, hey, can you want to stay overnight? I mean, they were super,
Never have to use a
Is it
plastic
worth
straw
over
again.
$5? Do I gotta?
no, I think it's $4.99. I think it's $4.99. So
Maybe you say, maybe, I want to be on that.
Wow.
For a dozen of them, it's fine.
Right. So I wanted to pass that on and make sure that the gift went to the,
That's awesome. I have no words for that.
Very nice presentation.
and with that, that ends my report.
Wonderful, thank you. Commissioner Beard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the 19th, I also attended the Intergovernmental Working Group at Mystic. Of course, what struck me the most was the cake and dessert we had. So, I don't know how Commissioner Beer overlooked that. Charlie
Well,
Bay
it was-
had announced his retirement, unfortunately, and so comments were made and well wishes were given, and we're going to miss him. But Charlie made it clear he's done, so we had cake and cried in our beer. On the 20th, following morning, I had breakfast with the governor in Prior Lake with about 200 of my close personal friends. That was really a big deal that the Prior Lake Rotary Club brought him out there. I think Senator Pratt had pulled a favor that he was owed, and the governor came out and spoke with us. A good time was had by all. That afternoon, we went to lunch with the MnDOT Metro engineer, Mike Barnes, downtown, and just talked about things of importance to Scott County and worked on the relationship. It was a good time, a good event. The 22nd, of course, the planning meeting with the terrible chairs that Commissioner Beer referred to. On the 2nd, met with the administrator, Leslie, just to come up to speed on things, our monthly meeting, which I really appreciate. That afternoon, the Industry Council, Human Services Industry Council meeting regarding the Academies of Shakopee at the Shakopee High School. On the 3rd, Commissioner Ulrich and I had the Transportation Committee meeting, and then the 3rd was Tuesday. Then that evening, I went to the Shakopee City Council, where on the agenda was municipal consent for the Highway 42 project that we just spoke about on the Quick Take project. The council did approve the concept plans and gave their permission to proceed with the plans as they were drafted. On a 5-0 vote, we had a good discussion while we were there, and I got to hand it to city staff. They did, I think, a very square job of presenting where we're at to this point, and I was able to reinforce some of Mr. Lillehog's comments, and instead of being a close vote, it was a unanimous vote, so I was glad I was there to speak to the project. That's my report.
Thank you. Commissioner Ulrich.
On the 20th, I also was at the intimate meeting with the governor, 200 or so. And then I was with meeting with Mike Barnes, and we talked about the future projects in Scott County, particularly the Bloomington Ferry Bridge and the potential additional lane there someday. So we're putting that on his radar and keep talking to him about that. Later that same day, the Transportation Advisory Board. The 21st, I attended the Minnesota Valley Transit Authority Management meeting. The 22nd, the County Board Planning meeting, and I did bring my comfortable chair, and I warned you, I said, in a couple hours you'll be wanting to rent my chair. But
You were right.
on the 26th, I attended the Live, Learn, Earn Steering Committee, and later that day, Fish Partner Relations meeting. That was in Shakopee, and it's an opportunity for us to meet people that are part of Fish and people that aren't, to talk about the work of Fish and to build relationships. The 2nd, I attended a meeting with coffee with Deb Barber, and we just talked about our perspective in terms of not supporting the metro-wide transportation sales tax that some want to put on the region. I made it clear that we're very much against that. And we had a good meeting. It was very collegial and cooperative and a great meeting. On the 3rd, the Transportation Committee that's been referred to, and then last night, the Parks Commission. That's the end of my report.
Great, thank you. For my report, on November 19th, the day of our last meeting, we actually had a workshop on our crossover youth and truancy programs after the board meeting. November 20th, I too happened to be at that meeting with the governor. It was good to have him in Scott County, and I think he spoke well to the crowd. Later that day, I also attended the Guild Incorporated Fundraising Luncheon. We had really good showing from Scott County, from staff, residents, nonprofits, some of the speakers and the clients who gave testimonials were from Scott County. So I think it is great to get these nonprofit providers in partnership with us on these programs. Later that day, on November 20th, we had the Extension Committee meeting, the quarterly Extension Committee meeting. You missed it, and there was good food, very good. November 21st, had the MELSA meeting, MELSA, our Regional Library Board in St. Paul, working on the budget for that entity next year, really making some shifts in some of the purchases that are made for all the library systems on databases and things like that to help save us each individually some money. That evening had our Scott County Library Board of Trustees out at the Belle Plaine Library. November 22nd was our board planning session. I didn't have any trouble with the chairs. November 25th, I met at the Jordan Food Shelf with the Mayor of Jordan and some of our staff from Public Health and Human Services to talk about ways that we can cooperate and be providing, access to services more locally in the community. So it was good to see the mayor's created quite a nice place there for the food shelf, envisioning some clinical services being offered also out of that location. November 26th was the chair-vice chair meeting. Later that day, I met with the new River Valley Health Services Executive Director, Bill Swanson. That's River Valley, it used to be River Valley Nursing. They've kind of changed gears a little bit. River Valley Health Services, providing healthcare services to people who are underinsured or uninsured. He talked with me about financial support from the county. He's also making an ask to Carver County, so I'm sure we'll talk about that more in the future. Later on November 26th, had the Scott County Mental Health Local Advisory Committee meeting, and then the Live, Learn, Earn Ed Prep Committee meeting. So that was a full day, I guess. December 2nd, I also attended the Shakopee High School Academy's Industry Council, and I committed us, the 5 of us, you're welcome, to coming up with some topics for 10th grade English for their argumentative essays about some different topics, real topics that we've been dealing with as a board the last year. So I think that'll be kind of fun, so you'll hear from me more on that. December 3rd, I went down to Blakely for their monthly township meeting. A couple items of note. One is that Steve Herman from Access Networks was there. We've been working with that private provider in Blakely Township to try and improve internet access to folks out there. There's some really difficult geographic situations. They do have over 30 households, which is not a lot of households in Blakely Township, so that's a good percentage signed up. They've been able to get internet access to over half of them. They're still working on the rest, so it was good to hear that update, that progress is being made on that. And then also the board down there had some questions about our transportation sales tax, so I'll get back to them on that. Last night, December 4th, attended Jordan Commercial Club meeting. Actually talked to Commissioner Wolf's dad there, so that was fun. Today, I had the We Can, which is our committee to end child abuse and neglect in Scott County, a subcommittee meeting. And then prior to this meeting, I had a meeting with citizen and friend John Miser. So that's the end of my report.
Can I add one thing, Madam Chair? After my meeting
Yes.
with the administrator, was it last week? A constituent, somebody, from the county here called up and had a problem with the permit. And I went back into Leslie's office and she worked on it, called planning and zoning. I think it took an hour, but we figured out what it was, or Leslie did. And the next day they got their permit and they were very happy about the service they got. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Commissioner Wolf, but it's really Brad and Marty and Kate and Jamie who all stayed late and did the effort to make sure that we all understood the issue and took care of it, so it's those staff people.
Yep, so, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for adding that. All right, on to county administrator update.
The only thing I have today, Madam Chair, is the TNT, the Truth and Taxation meeting today at 6 o'clock, if folks are interested in this room.
Wonderful, thank you. And Mr. Hosevar, do we have a need to recess for an attorney-client meeting?
You do not, Madam Chair.
Good, thank you very much. Any other business to come before the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn this meeting. I'd just like to announce that we will be meeting after this meeting in a workshop setting to discuss compensation issues. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. The meeting's adjourned. Thank you.